Coming up on the Whitney Reynolds Show, we are interviewing Dr. Wayne Gordon, a man who truly has an inspiring story and is making waves in Chicago. Stay tuned. The Whitney Reynolds Show is supported by Volvo, designed around you, and the Respiratory Health Association, raising funds and awareness for lung disease research and programs. Special thanks to the Autobarn Volvo of Oak Park, the Henry George School, and 27 Live. Coming up on the Whitney Reynolds Show, we have an exclusive interview with Reverend Dr. Wayne Gordon, whose inspiring story has changed the community that was once known for violence. Stay tuned. You're watching the Whitney Reynolds Show. This week on the Whitney Reynolds Show, we're talking with Reverend Dr. Wayne Gordon, aka Coach, and his wife Ann. The Reverend, a coach, and a man who's dedicated years of his life to improving a violence-stricken Chicago community. Welcome to the show, you two.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
So let's start going back to the early days, because we've been talking about the impact that you've had in a violence-stricken community, which is known as Lawndale. And you guys decided to move there. How did this happen?
Well, it kind of goes back even to when I was in high school. When I was in high school, I was just wanting to do something with my life, and I was praying, and I just said, hey, God, I'll do anything you want me to do. And I kind of heard in that time, it wasn't a voice or anything, but I just, in my mind was implanted this thought of working in an African-American community. So it started way back in high school. And then I came to Chicago that summer, spent a summer in the city, and I'm a kid from Iowa, more people in the city limits of Chicago than the whole state of Iowa. So it was a big deal for me and for my parents to let me come to Chicago. But I came, spent the summer here, fell in love with the city. At that time, did a lot of work in the Cabrini Green housing projects, played on a basketball team for there. I was 16, so I was just a kid myself. And while we were doing that, it was just an opportunity for me to get a feel of it. Then I went home, graduated from high school, came back to Wheaton in a suburb of Chicago, and went to Wheaton College. And while I was there, I spent 3 or 4 times a week I came to the city and did all kinds of things in the city. And so that began to get me acclimated to the city, falling in love. I just fell in love with the city.
And when he says fall in love, did you fall in love here in the city, you two?
Well, we didn't exactly fall in love here, but...
No, we met at my home church in Indianapolis at an event, and after we socialized for a while, he said, I want to talk to you for a minute. And he took me outside the church and said, you've kind of caught my eye. I'd like to get to know you. I don't know if you're engaged. I don't know if you have a boyfriend. I said, no, I'd love to get to know you. So we spent some time together, and right off the bat, he told me about this community he was living in Chicago, teaching and coaching. So it was I really honored that, because I felt like he was honest with me. It's not kind of like he had me fall in love with him and then say, oh, by the way, guess where I live and what I do.
So when you guys met, you'd already started teaching. Take us back to what actually got you to Lawndale.
Well, I was involved with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and so I started talking about I wanted to be a coach and a teacher. I decided when I was a student at Wheaton to get my education degree, and the best way I could make a difference was to be a public school teacher and a coach. So I started looking for African American high schools, primarily in Chicago, but I was open to going anywhere, to being a teacher and a coach. And an opening came up at Farragut High School to be a football coach, a wrestling coach, and to be a teacher. So that got exciting for me, and it's in North Lawndale. And so I did something very unusual, is that I moved into the neighborhood where the kids live. 140 teachers, not one teacher lived in the neighborhood. So, at that time there were about 90 public high schools in Chicago. And so I moved into the neighborhood where the kids lived, and then I started an FCA group at my apartment. I lived on 15th and Kedzie. And the kids started coming over to my apartment. And so I'm teaching, I'm coaching, I'm living in the neighborhood, and many people thought it was pretty dramatic. For me, it was just, I'm doing what God's called me to do.
What's so interesting is the neighborhood, whenever you're saying those coordinates, like that's known for a ton of murders. Isn't it known for, what is it called? There's an area right over there known.
Well, I ended up moving, which unbeknownst to me, of course, right by a little tavern that was known as the Bucket of Blood.
That's what it was.
And the Bucket of Blood, unfortunately, if you're on the west side, people know where that is. But it was about a block from my apartment. Some of my kids on my football team were afraid to come to my apartment because they said, "Coach, you live by the Bucket of Blood." I didn't know what they were talking about. But it kind of gave me a little bit of stature that I lived by the Bucket of Blood.
Right,
but,
and you were starting a group.
Yeah, but I didn't have any real problems there for the most part, and it's an all African American community. The amazing thing is the people of Lawndale have from day one been so loving, so kind, and so receiving of me and into the community. So I was there for a year before I met Ann. So she had to decide.
So you came in pretty quick.
Right, a year later, we dated for a year, and I just came into Chicago a couple of times, and I didn't know really what an inner city even meant,
right,
to tell you the truth. I had a lot to learn. I was pretty naive, but I also wanted my life to mean something. So I was very drawn to this guy that's like, oh, he's on a mission, he knows what he wants to do, and it sounds good to me. So, yeah, we got married, and I moved in then a year later. So.
And I told her, I said, this is what God's called me to do. I'm going to do this the rest of my life. So I've always said I'm going to do this my whole life. Probably 4 or 5 years into it, Ann said to me one day, she said, "Do we have to say for life? I mean, can we just say until God leads us elsewhere?" Well, 40 years later, we're still there. So but now we love it. But when we first got married, I'll never forget this. We got married, we went on a little honeymoon, went to Niagara Falls, typical little honeymoon. We came back, and when we came back to our apartment, her parents, we picked up at the airport, we went to church, and then when we got to the apartment, it had been broken into. And they had broken into our apartment, stole all of our things, wedding gifts and things that were of value. And that was the first time my father-in-law had seen this. It was a really hard day. The front door was broken in, and all of our things are gone. So it's our first night in Lawndale that Ann has joined me. My father-in-law's there, never seen it. So it was hard. We got them bedded down. We're sleeping in the floor in the back room. And I'll never forget, we wouldn't be here today, but I said to Ann, I said, sometimes in Christians, we have these open doors, God closes a door, opens a door, and, roadblocks, so we go the other way. So I thought, well, this must be a sign from God that everybody told me, don't bring a wife to live here. You're doing it, you're kind of crazy, but you shouldn't bring a woman to live here with you. It's just too dangerous. And so I thought, well, this has to be a sign from God. So I said, honey, I think I made a mistake. I think that this must be a sign from God that that I wasn't supposed to bring you to Lawndale and to be my wife here in the community. I think we probably better move. And she looked me dead in the eye. And she said, honey, I love you. We're both crying. Honey, I love you, and I want to live here. Now, I would have moved, and we wouldn't be sitting here with you today. And so Ann's courage of that first day. Now, I
always say, he never gave me another chance.
So one chance is all she got.
And you're right. Without that courage, you would not be, in the studio with us today for one, but all the lives you've changed. Right now, we're going to throw it to the Social Sizzle. We're going to take a look at their journey in the Lawndale community.
Just a short ride down the Pink Line, there's a neighborhood that has spent the last 50 years in an economic and social crisis. The people have seen the government and society turn its back on the basic needs of the community. Poverty and violence have ruled the streets. The children have not had adequate health care, schools, social programs, or strong leadership to show them a better way. 35 years ago, a young man heard the call of God. He moved into Lawndale and got a job coaching and teaching at the local high school. He fell in love with a young woman, and she followed him into his call. We were married and set out on a journey together. We had a rocky start as our apartment was broken into the first night after our honeymoon. We bought an old storefront with an apartment above and started a Bible study through the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Most of the kids who came to the Bible study did not have the proper clothes to attend their local churches. This prompted a study on what the church really is. From that study, the kids decided we needed to start our own church. This was not something Coach, the name the kids used for him, and I had ever planned on or dreamed of. After much prayer and seeking counsel, we decided to step out and start the church. Our philosophy was and still is to listen to our community, then develop programs and solutions together based on needs. The issues are vast, everything from health care to a safe place to do laundry. We had someone donate a washer and dryer and opened it up for community use. This was the start of transforming a community. Our desire was not just to serve our community, but to love them in a way that empowers them to create change. This equalizes the relationship and allows us to lead from a place of walking alongside the community. As the years have passed, we have continued listening. Out of the church has grown a health center with 4 sites that employ over 300 people and had over 140,000 patient visits last year. Our church also started a development corporation that has led to 400 units of rental, 400 units of ownership housing, and about $50 million of development in our community. There are many initiatives, from a residential program for men, a hip-hop church, community arts center, after-school education program, legal center, and much more. The church has grown to 1,000 in attendance and has continued to be a community-centered church. The years have come with many challenges, and we have often felt like giving up. But God's faithfulness has been there time after time and has kept us focused on His heart for the community.
Wow, what a powerful video. There's been so many initiatives that you have done in the community, from the health center to the church, and then you're still coaching.
Yes. Well, it's all of the ideas of what we've done have come from the people. Mm-hmm. So we often set up a chalkboard and just say, what are some of the needs in our community? We always talk about the good things that are happening first. And so we see there's a lot of good things in our neighborhood. And then what are some things that need a little help? And so starting a health center, that was on the list 31 years ago. Wow. So we started off with 1 doctor, now we've got 40 and see 200,000 patients a year. It's amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah, our development corporation, same thing. We needed adequate housing, so we've got about 400 units of housing. And the legal center that we have, where kids 24 and under, they really don't have any good legal care. The public defender is taking 100 cases, so we only let our lawyers have 10 cases. And so they're helping the kids through there, but then it's a whole wraparound in the legal center. So they have to come, they do community service, and they come for tutoring, and we get to know the kids very, very well.
And do you feel safer in the neighborhood now that you say 40 years later?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. The guns are a real problem. So there are more shootings now than there were early on. However, so many people know who I am. And I feel like, I feel so loved in our community and looked after, that I feel like if anyone in the vicinity saw anything happening to me, there'd probably be 2 or 3 people who would jump to my side.
When we first got married, 2 of the lightest wrestlers, the 98-pound and 105-pound wrestler on my wrestling team, adopted Ann as they were her bodyguards.
Oh, yeah.
They're still
adorable.
In our church. 40 years later,
yeah.
They're still with us. We had dinner with them last night.
Oh, and then you raised kids there too.
We did. And there were days I thought, oh, is this really the right thing to do? And there were challenging moments. But our kids' experience has been so rich.
Yeah.
Anytime you live in a cross-cultural type of a setting, your depth of understanding of different people and different ways of looking at things really grows. So I feel like the benefits outweigh the challenges, but there were definitely challenges.
One story that really, when I was listening to you speak, you told a story about kind of a different perspective of coming into this community and being a teacher. Not that I'm saying a lot of teachers get lost in the shuffle, but you forget that one life really matters. And I love the story that you said. I think his name was Top Cat.
Yeah.
Can you tell our viewers about Top Cat?
Yeah, well, Top Cat, it was my first year of teaching, and I inherited a class, and he didn't come to class. And so I said to the kids, anybody know anything about this student? And they said, oh, you mean Top Cat. I didn't know his nickname. And so in the hall that day, I meet him, and I say, hey, Top Cat. I grab him by the shoulders. I kind of look him straight in the eye, and I say, Top Cat, I'm your new teacher, and you're failing class because you haven't come. And he looked at me, and he says, Mr. Gordon, I'll be there tomorrow. Next morning, 7:45, he shows up. And so Top Cat is the kind of person you hope as a teacher you get to teach, because he came every day. He became a straight A student. And he was my prize student. I just loved him. He was always answering the questions. Then after about 3 months, one day happened, and he doesn't show up to class. And when he doesn't show up, I wait 5 minutes, and it's the first day he's ever been tardy, and I say, "Does anybody know anything about Top Cat?" And they said, "Coach, you didn't hear about Top Cat?" I said, "No." What do you mean? They said there was a holdup at a gas station that he works all night, and he got shot. He's dead. And I remember that. It's always had an impact on me. And so nothing in any of the TVs, nothing in any of the newspapers in Chicago. I couldn't even go to his funeral. I didn't even know where it was. But he's one of those nameless, faceless people of our society that become statistics. And that really began to change a little bit and help me to think about a philosophy of how are we going to make a difference in our community. And that came to, we just have to love every person as much as we can for the little bit of time we get to know them.
There's been I don't want to call it a campaign, but Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And it's, every life matters.
Right.
And I think when we start looking at people just as like a statistic, like you said, we get lost in the shuffle, and we forget that these are kids that need our help.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So what have you seen change since your time at the school? Because Top Cat happened how many?
Well, 40 years ago.
40 years ago. So what have you seen change?
Well, I think unfortunately, it's too bad that we have to be in a world today that we say Black Lives Matters. And the reason we need to say that, and it's important we do say that, because our society, and even here in Chicago, so many things say Black lives don't matter. There's so many times that young Black people are said their lives are not important.
Which is a shame.
Yeah, and so this year, you're talking about violence, already this year, we've averaged 17 murders a year for the last 10 years. And we as a church, Ann leads a thing on how to not live in a violent community and alternatives to violence. She has a whole program that she and others are training people in. But this year, and we pray and we fast every Wednesday about this, but we thought we were doing better. But right now, we're 10 months into the year, and we've already had 30 murders. So we're way past our average.
I commend you both on not giving up on the community and being there and sewing into it, because that, being a part of this is like living in the city, no matter what area, or living in whatever area. I mean, people could be watching in a different state today, but whatever area you're in is making your impact and how you make a difference.
Well, and that's the thing, it's our neighborhood now. We don't say it's their neighborhood and we're coming to help this neighborhood. No, we benefit from it too. We suffer when there are hard things. We enjoy good things. And it's our neighborhood. And it really makes a difference when you own that, even though we, on the outside, look like we don't fit in. And one of the positives you were asking over the years is we have so many indigenous leaders in our ministry, people who've grown up since they were kids, and all this stuff, all these statistics of what goes on, we're just a really small part of it now, because we have so many people in so many positions of leadership. And that's a joy for us, because we've seen them grow up, and we get to see them develop into these care. And many of them have had the option to move away too. And they're the real heroes, because they've chosen to stay in their own community.
It becomes a movement.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to our next segment, The Viewer's Voice, where we take it to the streets and have the viewers weigh in. Today's question is, how has racial profiling affected you?
Well, we are out here homeless, and the police bother us a lot, but they only bother Black people. They don't bother, white people. I don't mean to say it like that, but the police is racial profiling a lot down here.
I've been fortunate it hasn't affected me personally, but as a person of color, it's something I'm always cognizant of and aware of, and try to make sure that I can do all that I can to make sure it doesn't affect me or others around me.
I taught school for many years. In the 1950s, I was stopped by a black cop, and I was coming from an education class, and I said to him, I'm a teacher, I would never break the law openly. And he said to me in a quotation I use with my students, he said, well, consider this part of your education. and this is your tuition. He did not try to change my heart. He wanted to change my behavior, and he was quite right.
So we just asked the viewers about racial profiling. Do you feel like that still goes on in the community?
Absolutely, yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, I think, driving while black is, people think that's a violation, so people in our community talk a lot about that.
So you still see that?
Absolutely.
We do.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately. And it took me a long time to even believe it, coming from white America, suburbia, Indianapolis, where the police are always your friend and you could just always trust every situation. And then in Lawndale, as I became friends with the women in the community who are moms, and they would describe, like, if their child was going to drive to Mississippi or something, they would have such fear, and they would tell them where they should stop, where they shouldn't stop. And all of a sudden I thought, this is real, And like I said, I just grew up in such a different environment that for a while I thought, oh, people are just kind of exaggerating.
And even in going in stores, a black man comes into a store, there's probably a nice store, somebody's going to follow him around. And we've seen it, but our friends have told us this hundreds and hundreds of times.
And in Lawndale today, there's not a grocery store.
No. How
can that be? That mind boggles me.
Yeah, well, it's a very depressed community. I mean, it's the inner city, and so a lot of things have left. They left after the riots in the 60s.
Things got burned
and we've
out.
been working to bring a lot of that back. And so, like, for instance, we have a fitness center. So we have a fitness center that's, it rivals any fitness center in Chicago.
And it has a coffee shop in it.
And we have a coffee shop. We brought a pizzeria into the community. There was no sit-down restaurant until we opened a Lou Malnati's Pizzeria. And the Malnati family was willing to come alongside of us. We just celebrated 20 years of having it in the community.
Well, see, I see a very bright light coming from Lawndale. So let's talk about your books.
Okay.
So, Loving the Neighbor.
Yeah.
Tell us, that's what you've been writing. There's one that's just all about loving your neighbor. A simple concept, but something that I think all of our viewers need to hear. Yeah,
well, it's a kind of part of our genre. I mean, our theme of a church and all the ministries, Health Center Development Corporation, our Hope House for Men getting out of prison, coming off of drugs, it's all loving God, loving people. That's what we're about. And so Jesus, when he talked about it, he said the greatest commandment is to love God with everything you have and love your neighbor as you love yourself. Most of us who have people of faith, we really work hard to love God, but we forget number two, which Jesus said is just like the first. And so loving our neighbor is very important. Jesus tells the story in Luke about how when somebody asks him, well, who is my neighbor? And so I studied that for 25 years before I wrote this book. And it's like, it's the story that almost everybody knows. It's called the story of the Good Samaritan. And and there's a man beaten up. A priest comes by. The pastor doesn't stop. The Levi, and so another religious leader comes, doesn't stop. But who stops is a Samaritan, which is somebody of a different race that stops and helps this man beaten up on the side of the road. So I studied that and found 40 characteristics. So I wrote a book about it. And like, who is my neighbor? My neighbor, for instance, want me to give you all 40 chapters? No.
I don't think we have time for that.
Yeah, I can, but like my neighbor's somebody that nobody wants to help. My neighbor's somebody that can't help themselves. The Bible says he was beaten up till he's half dead. So what are the characteristics of somebody of a different race? We think of our neighbor as being somebody who lives next door to us.
Right.
Jesus' definition of neighbor is clearly different than that, and it's all about who's the man beaten up on the side of the road.
And helping them.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for coming on today. Where can people find more out about your books?
Well, our Lawndale website is just lawndalechurch.org.
lawndalechurch.org. Anything else, Ann, that you want to leave our viewers with today?
Well, this is wonderful to get an opportunity to talk about our lives and to share the many blessings that we feel. Sometimes I feel like people feel so sorry for us, and it's like our lives are very rich and very full, and there's a lot left to do, and just pray for our community. So,
absolutely. And what's next for you? I mean, you have changed this community. What's next?
Well, I think just more of the same, and what our focus really is right now, I meet with the mayor and other pastors, and Ann's working on, but how do we dispel the violence in our community? What can we do? And, another book I wrote is called Real Hope in Chicago, and I think people have lost hope. And so we want to try to help bring hope back into the community.
I love that. Well, we hope today's show has inspired you to go out there and be a good neighbor. Smile at strangers and reach out to communities that need hope. For more information on today's show, visit whitneyreynolds.com. The Whitney Reynolds Show is supported by Volvo, designed around you, and the Respiratory Health Association, raising funds and awareness for lung disease research and programs. Special thanks to the Auto Barn Volvo of Oak Park, the Henry George School, and 27 Live.